All right, today we're going to talk about making parts and actually demonstrate how to make parts for the Wooden Boat Festival. We've gone through at a meeting all the different parts we can make, but today we're going to dwell specifically on cabins for sailboats and maybe a shrimp boat. In fact, we've gone through the trailer today and have discovered that cabins are what we need. So I'm going to talk about making a shrimp boat cabin and what typically goes on the sailboats, or two sailboat cabins, and we'll go through the steps in making this. I want to remind folks that probably on the website there are plans with dimensions. I'm not going to mention every dimension that I do, but there are some plans. Various folks have added those, and we got a step-by-step procedure on how to do some of this. As you can see here, there are a lot of different cabins that people make, and that's great. I think variety is good for the kids, but I'm going to dwell specifically on the three that I mentioned. I typically use patterns. Every time I get going, I try to make a pattern, and you'll see me use those as I go through the process. The first step is to take your basic 2x4s, 2x6s, and to cut the basic, everything I do, I cut to about 2-inch wide, 1.5 inch high by 2-inch wide. In the case of the shrimp boat cabin, I'll stand it up and draw my pattern. In the case of these lower cabins that go on your typical sailboat setup, I leave it flat and make them in that dimension. So I'll start by marking a few of these, and then from there we'll go into actually making cuts. So here's the typical sailboat cabin. What I start off with is just drawing it round on the board, and I'll leave a little room for the curve of the saw. Okay. On the curve one, I do both. What I do is I make a curve in the back, one in the front, and then I just kind of repeat this as I go down the board. And on the shrimp boat, we do the same thing. I have a pattern, and what I would typically do is I'll just draw the front of the cabin, leave a little room for a curve, and draw it on the board. Okay, I want to stop there. Okay, so the next step then is to cut the individual pieces. You can do that on the chop saw. When I'm doing a lot of these, and I'll usually have a lot longer boards, I'll take and stack several of them up and probably cut 3-4 cabins at a time. But right now I'm just going to cut the one. And we'll go back to the next step. So, okay, the next step is on these three different cabins is to cut off some of the excess wood. On this type cabin where I taper the front end, I have to do both. I've marked this with a pattern, and I've marked the curve when we first determined where to cut the piece. On the shrimp boat cabin, the only thing I'll take off is this little nick in the front. And then on the curved cabin, I'm going to basically cut all the front and back curves. This remains square, and I'll do that in just a minute. So let me just start this up. By the way, I'm using a 1/4-inch blade to do most of my cutting. Usually on the curves, that's about what I need. I don't worry too much. I'll cut probably proud to the line, and I can bring it back in with sanding later on. So I'm basically just trying to remove some material. Again, I'm not worried about being dead on with the cut. And on this one, I'll take a little off. I can clean that up with the sander. And on the one with the front and the back, this becomes the back, that becomes the front. Do one more. Okay. Next step is drill our portholes, which I'll do on the drill press. Okay, so our next step is to drill the portholes. I typically go 3, sometimes maybe just 2, depending on the wood. I use a Fosner bit to do that, and I basically drill to the depth of the bit. That's my gauge as to how far I go in. So the bit fits in, and as you can see, I go down to about that depth. So we'll put this in the drill press. A simple way to line this up is the first one you probably have to measure. On future ones, I move the fence until it goes in. I set my fence. Okay, so I'm good. So on the new ones, and I don't measure much, I just kind of drill my holes as I go. What I do is after that, I slide this through to get the material out of my way, and I just come back on the other side. I'll do the same on the curved back as well. Maybe I'll just do 2 holes. Turn that around, come through. Now generally I try to go a little slower when I'm feeding in. That helps to eliminate some of the tear out. But a lot of the tear out will get removed when I do the sanding operation. So we'll sand the sand, and the sanding brings all the parts. I get rid of the proud cuts that I make, and it gives me a chance to kind of do the final shape. I'm on a 12-inch disc here. This is on the Shopsmith. A lot of people have the 12-inch disc on a separate machine. I use 80 grit sandpaper. And as long as you keep moving the part, you don't get the swirls on there, and it does a pretty good job. I don't think you need to go any finer. So I'll start with one and I'll work through the other two. Not a lot to do sometimes, but I'll clean up all the surfaces, and then that's a finished part. So that's basically a finished cabin there. Sometimes I'll take a little pair of pliers to get the last bit of material that's left in there. This probably could have been sanded in the back, but I put the nice curve on it and the front on that. And basically on this, it's just clean up any surface and put the bevel on the front for the shrimp. So before I talked about cutting the 2-inch log for making the cabins. When I do the roof, it's basically 2 1/4 inches wide. That gives me a nice overhang on the cabin. So I usually cut the 2 1/4, and then I'll stand that piece up on end and basically do a resaw to get the thickness that I want on that. Again, I use patterns to mark the board, cut it, and I'll nick the corners on the bandsaw, and then do a final sand to get the final roof nice and round in the front. And then the last step is just basically glue on the cabin to the roof, and all I do is I line all these up. I put a little glue. I use Tight Bond 2. I'll smear a little glue on there, and I just kind of eyeball it so that the overlap on each side is about the same. It's not too far front, too far back. I'll do that, give it one little press, and set it aside to dry. And probably within about an hour, half hour, that'll be a finished cabin. That's it.